My name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review, the first of 2023. Today, I am reviewing That Guy in Our Women's Studies class by Allan D. Hunter. This is the sequel to Genderqueer, A Story from a Different Closet, and it follows our self-identified heterosexual cis male Derek as he continues on with his college classwork, trying to find his place as someone who is gender nonconforming. And just so we're clear, yes, gender nonconforming, but as far as I can tell, still he, him pronouns. Now, quick note here at the beginning. One, obviously, I will have the review to the first book linked down in the description. And two, no critique of the protagonist automatically equates to a critique of the author. Trying to take real life and put it onto paper is a Herculean task, and a lot can get lost in translation. Not to mention that, again, this book takes place in the late 80s, early 90s. A lot could have changed since then. So we're not gonna equate anything of Derek directly to Allan, if that makes sense. With that being said, going into this one, I was slightly nervous because Genderqueer had some light overtones of I'm a feminist nice guy, why don't women like me? Which low-key gave me the ick. However, it was light enough and I thought, well, maybe there could be growth moving forward, so I continued. However, the lack of awareness continues in this book tenfold. And it was very interesting because the narrative wants you to believe very badly that Derek is brilliant. Many characters note how his papers and theories are above and beyond all of his peers. All of the professors are either in awe of his brilliance or threatened by him. But you don't really see it because there's some fundamentals of the world around him that Derek seems to miss completely, and some fundamental myths that he sticks to throughout the course of the story. Derek has this overlaying sense of, well, I'm gender nonconforming, although he doesn't say that, he says sissy, so clearly there should be no issue with me in these spaces. And there are a lot of queer men today that still have that idea of, well, I'm not entirely cis or not entirely straight, therefore it's exactly the same. No, it's not. And it was especially frustrating because there was the opportunity in the narrative for that self-awareness to come in, for there to be a character arc. Because later on in the story, there is a character, and I don't know if this is a one-to-one to a real person or an amalgamation of several real-life people, but there is a male professor that the protagonist kind of like butts heads with that also teaches these feminist studies. And that could have been a is it me moment. That could have been a chance for self-reflection, for looking back. Is this how the other women in these courses are afraid I'm going to act? And there wasn't really that. It continued to be a, well, I belong here and everyone who's threatened by me is wrong. A lot of everyone who doesn't think what I think is wrong aspect to this story. A lot of obstinance. And it was, again, lack of self-awareness, very strange because the exact things that he got angry at his professors for were the exact things that the protagonist was showing in the book. And it was the oddest juxtaposition because he refused to accept that he didn't already know everything. He seemed to view going to college not as I am going to learn and grow, but oh, I need this stepping stool to get my theories out there because my theories deserve to be out there. There wasn't a lot of, the protagonist didn't seem to see the need for any kind of growth. And now that could be a really cool character arc as he grows and learns that no, he doesn't know everything. The problem is that there wasn't any. It was just people getting in his way and annoying him and not understanding his brilliance, or understanding his brilliance but not being able to help him. There was not a lot of self-reflection in it. And in general, the narrative aspects of this narrative memoir are where it struggled the most. There were moments where, for example, Derek begins this kind of relationship with Jenna. They're not official. It's just like a beginning thing, like a potential. The meet cute has happened. They like maybe had like a thing or two, maybe, but then Jenna cuts it off for whatever reason, and Derek goes into a full-on post-breakup grieving spiral. The thing is that the tone before then of the beginning of the relationship had really been light and like, oh, this could be something. This has potential. But the breakup was like, you would have thought that they were in a relationship for years just based on the tone of those scenes. So there wasn't a lot of smooth sailing between the scenes telling the story because it honestly felt like he was overreacting. And I'm going to say that's probably more as a result of the burgeoning romance wasn't given the correct tone in earlier scenes to show how much he cared about her before it ended. But there was that problem a lot of the scenes where it was supposed to be showing the human aspect, the building the relationship with his parents again after all the struggles of the first book and trying to become an activist for people who have been unlawfully incarcerated in medical institutions. Like, those should have had more emotions and they didn't. The dialogue was fairly stilted, and obviously you can't expect someone to remember word for word conversations decades after the fact. That's just not going to be a thing. But the dialogue in the book was still felt very fictional, and I think it could have gotten a couple passes of, well, more real life fictionalizing. That, let me explain. Humans don't talk in full grammatically correct sentences, but everyone in this book did. Even the people who were like down on their luck homeless people with very little education. So it needed a more human element. It needed a more even flow. A lot needed to be cut out because there was a lot of minutia. For example, Derek decides to re-up the college's paper to get his ideas out there. And it goes into detail about like margins and typeset and how it worked and how they decided to do it on computer instead. And you're like, none of that was pertinent to the idea of what the paper was, what the impact of the paper was, and that kind of thing. Or later on, I noted that there was one scene where the narrative was describing in depth how this Mac computer worked, and it was the exact same number of paragraphs as the next scene, which was him talking with his romantic interest at the time about having an open relationship. Like, the computer talk got as much screen time as the complicated relationship talk. And those paragraphs of technical minutia ground the flow to a halt. I'm not sure why exactly they were in there. Again, it's really difficult to self-edit when it's your own life, but there was not a great flow to it. And I think one of the things that frustrated me the most is that at the very end, and it's not a very big spoiler here, is that the Derek, and maybe the author by proxy, seems to realize what the problem is and realizes why that all of these women in these feminism studies would be afraid of a man, even a self-identified heterosexual sissy, coming into the spaces would be, and also admits that feminism as a thought process in academia probably even wasn't the best place for these gender non-conforming theories, that gender queer studies or just queer studies in general probably would have been a better fit for it. But Derek spends the entire book trying to separate himself from the trans community. And nowadays, I think most people will accept that gender non-conforming is a whole thing with both non-binary and trans people. And it's just very, very frustrating that we suddenly had that bit of self-awareness at the very end, but nothing felt like it led to that. Like, it wasn't like a character arc finished by this realization. It was, he's angry and annoyed that no one seems to understand him and everyone's just standing in his way, and oh, well, I guess. That was the struggle, and that's why I mentioned that the narrative aspect is where this book struggled the most. It needed more lead up to that realization as opposed to kind of just tagging that realization on at the end. I really wish that the book had been written with that realization in mind so that everything could grow into that. And obviously, it's very difficult to look back and think, what are the themes of my real life? What are the arcs of my real life? But if you are going to do a narrative memoir, you have to build them in. It's just a facet of the genre. And I wish that the author would have either built them in or just written a straight nonfiction memoir. Straight as in a completely nonfiction memoir, Obviously, the queer element should stay, but you get what I mean. Now, as a result, I gave this book 2 stars. I will not be continuing with it. However, I do think that others could still get something out of this. Maybe they could see a perspective that I don't, but for my part, I am calling it here. I have, actually, I already have another queer memoir on my list already, so I'm not lacking for it, but regardless, let me know if you're interested in this kind of genderqueer, non-conforming memoir stuff. I could do a recommendations list. Actually, I do have some queer memoir recommendations under my belt. But regardless, thank you so much for watching. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.